Whew, a little bit out of breath. Nice little spin on the bike here. So, Bernard Sanders, also known as Bernie Sanders, endorsed Joe Biden today during a live stream. I think it was a Joe Biden live stream. Bernie jumped on, full out endorsed him without getting any type of concessions from Biden whatsoever. Again, was it earlier? No, I should say last week, Biden and his team came out with that ridiculous proposal to supposedly court some people on the left, court some of Bernie Sanders supporters by lowering the Medicare eligibility age from 65 to 60. Again, that's to the right of where Hillary Clinton was in 2016. I believe she was saying she would lower it to 50 or 55, and then that means tested student debt relief as well. And then fast forward a week later, after I guess a little bit less than a week after Bernie drops out, completely folds, doesn't get any type of concessions or anything from Joe Biden, no type of policy commitments for, really important things like Medicare for all during a fucking pandemic, canceling all student loan debt, a Green New Deal, emergency UBI, none of these things that, Bernie Sanders, very much supports and has been trying to fight to make these things a reality, basically for his entire political career, things like, Medicare for all, so we don't have, again, 68,000+ people dying each year in the wealthiest country on the face of the earth because they don't have health care, or, we don't have 500,000+ people going bankrupt each year because of, our for-profit rapacious healthcare system. No concessions, no anything, I'm hugely, I don't know about you, but I'm hugely disappointed in Bernie Sanders. And again, I understand that he has always had the mindset that he would support the Democratic, nominee, no matter who it was. But you don't have any leverage now. Supposedly there's some, commission with Biden's and Bernie's people on it where they're supposed to be, hammering out, some policies that, are more in line with the left or with what Bernie supports. But again, excuse me, mouth's a little dry, but by endorsing Biden right now, he gave up all of his leverage. He has no leverage whatsoever to try to get Biden to support things like Medicare for all, canceling student loan debt, tuition-free college, a Green New Deal, more sane and rational foreign policy, all of these things. He's not going to get shit from Biden now, and it's like, looking back to 2016, it was in July. It wasn't until I think like July 13th or something like that when Bernie Sanders came out and supported, or endorsed, I should say, Hillary Clinton in 2016. And during that time, I believe he was trying to get some concessions from her behind the scenes before he gave her his endorsement. So what gives right now? And again, we are in the middle of a public health crisis due to the coronavirus pandemic and, our just really shitty for-profit healthcare system and all of the obvious failings from the Trump administration putting out any type of adequate response to this. And then we have the economic meltdown. We're more than likely going to be experiencing Great Depression levels of unemployment in the coming months. Again, 16 million people have lost their jobs in the last 3 weeks. That's about 10% of the U.S. workforce. And Joe Biden is nowhere to be seen. He's not offering any type of, rational or adequate response from a policy or platform perspective, both from the public health side as well as the economic side. Again, a couple of weeks ago, he was out there saying, yeah, I don't think, a single payer Medicare for all system would have helped anybody during this crisis. There was a teenager who died in California because he didn't have insurance. They told him to go to a public hospital. On his way there, driving to the public hospital, he had a heart attack, died 6 hours later. Think if everybody was covered, he would still be alive today. I think that's, pretty important for him and his family. He's not the only one. And we obviously have, a lot of stories about people getting charged tens of thousands of dollars for their medical treatment if they are, diagnosed with the coronavirus and they have to stay in the hospital any length of time. Those bills just pile up astronomically, and Biden has no type of adequate response whatsoever on this front, and Bernie's just throwing in the towel at this point. And I've, at least on the Twitter sphere, a lot of people who were Bernie supporters aren't jumping on that Biden bandwagon, especially if Biden at least isn't willing to commit to a few of the core policy platforms that Bernie Sanders supported and are the reasons a lot of people supported him. Medicare for all, canceling student loan debt, tuition-free college, ending the wars, a livable wage, all of those things. And he's also calling for an emergency UBI right now for the duration of the crisis. Biden doesn't support any of those things, and you just expect all the people that supported Bernie to support Biden. It ain't gonna happen, Bernie. And unfortunately, Bernie wasn't the type of leader that we need right now. We actually need somebody who's willing to stand up and fight the Democratic establishment, who'd be willing to fight back against Joe Biden. It didn't matter if Bernie wasn't going to become the nominee. At least stay in there and fight. Try to at least get some concessions on at least 2 or 3 of these really important things from Joe Biden. If I had to pick 2, Medicare for all, canceling student loan debt, and Green New Deal. Those are super important. And maybe, tuition-free college. You can't get Biden to support 2 or 3 or all 4 of those. Say you're not going to support him. What's the point of actually having a so-called progressive in Bernie Sanders running for president if he's actually not willing to stand up and fight during the absolutely critical time that we are experiencing right now in the United States? And Bernie just completely, caved in. He completely imploded, and a lot of people are feeling kind of sold out by him. What was the point of knocking on doors, canvassing? What was the point of Bernie talking about starting and being a part of a political revolution? You're not acting like a political revolutionary, Bernie, if you drop out and a week later endorse Joe Biden without Biden making any type of policy concessions going more towards the left. I'm obviously not the only one to make this point, but what's the point of actually having, progressives elected or progressives running for president if they're actually not willing to stand up and fight for their values? Hugely disappointing and, disgusting. And I have the feeling, and it's definitely reflected, online with the people I follow and the people who've been retweeting things about this, that a lot of people aren't going to support Joe Biden, and I don't blame them. And especially if he doesn't, again, start making some policy concessions, even, if he doesn't necessarily follow through with them elected, at least, put out there that you're going to support Medicare for all, and then when you get in office, maybe flip back on it. He's not even willing to do that, and Bernie still just endorsed him anyway. It's hugely hugely disgusting and disappointing. And I think it was Jeffrey St. Clair of Counterpunch. His roaming charges article that comes out on Fridays is just marvelous, really full of a lot of information, humor, and insight. Highly recommend checking that out. But he's always referred to kind of Bernie as the sheepdog who will just try to corral and herd people into the, really just corrupt and corporatist and bankrupt Democratic Party, no matter what the cost, and no matter if they don't support any of the things. Like Joe Biden doesn't support hardly any of the things that Bernie Sanders ran on. And Bernie Sanders, unfortunately, he was a failed candidate in a lot of ways. He wasn't willing to go after and really attack Joe Biden. Bernie wasn't willing to run a campaign that actually wanted to win. A lot of his, advisors, people like his campaign manager, Faiz Shakur, David Sirota, Breonna Joy Gray, people like that really wanted him to actually go after Biden, especially when it was down to those two. But he didn't want to because, well, Joe Biden's always been nice to him. Well, fucking tough shit, Bernie. People are really suffering and struggling. There's people dying right now. People are losing their jobs in the millions, and you weren't willing to hold out your support of endorsing Joe Biden until he at least supported a couple of the things that you supposedly believe in and care for strongly and that this country really needs right now. Like Medicare for all, universal health care during a pandemic. You couldn't even get Joe Biden to commit to that. Bernie, you're just, I love you, and I, appreciate that you've moved the Overton window in this country to a certain extent, as evidenced by, people overwhelmingly supporting things like, Medicare for all. But what's the point if you didn't run a campaign to win and you're the only one, fighting for those things? Your campaign, unfortunately, again, was a, huge failure and disappointment, and unfortunately a lot of that can be chalked up to decisions that Bernie himself made, not wanting to attack Joe Biden, to go after him on the issues, and then this instance in particular, not holding out your endorsement. This is fucking April. You endorsed Hillary July of 2016. You endorsed her then, whole 4 months from now, working behind the scenes to get some policy concessions and whatnot. Why weren't you willing to do that now when the United States is in a far more precarious place? And, Joe Biden is lucky if he's able to string together a few coherent sentences now and then. So, good luck, Bernie, convincing your supporters to get behind Joe Biden. You're going to have a hell of a time, especially if Joe Biden doesn't make any type of policy concessions, which he hasn't at this point, besides that really fucking shitty centrist of policy of dropping the Medicare eligibility age by 5 years to 60, or that means tested college, debt relief. If that's all you're going to come up with, people are not going to get out and vote for Joe Biden. And again, Joe Biden does not have the movement behind him who's willing to go out, knock on doors, make calls, even donate. Honestly, I, canvassed for the first time for Bernie, along with, donating, making a monthly donation to his campaign. I'm not going to do that for Joe Biden. And I think a lot of people probably feel the same way that I do. He has the lowest, it's like the lowest rate of enthusiasm for Joe Biden that's like any presidential candidate in history, I believe. This is the candidate that Bernie Sanders is expecting his followers to get behind and support him so he can defeat Donald Trump. It's pathetic, it's sad, and I definitely expected more out of Bernie, at least hold out a couple of months, hold Biden's feet to the fire, and then endorse him at that point. I would have understood that a little more. But again, Bernie lost all leverage. the cat's out of the bag now. You already endorsed him. Why would Biden make any type of concessions at this point? I don't think he would. He's going to keep following that corporate, centrist path that he's staked out for himself, over the decades, and he's going to continue to follow that, and just hugely troubling and disappointing. That's enough rambling, but just really pissed off at Bernie and feeling a little bit betrayed. So I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment sections down below. Peace, much love.